I never
I
thought my
remember my
life would end up
grandmother
this
telling me
way.
that same story.
Locked in a bathroom by my
Funny
own
how the
son for
older you
2 days
get, the
because I used
clearer
too
those
much hot
memories
water.
become.
No food, no
I
chair,
never
just a
thought I'd
cold
make it
floor
through that
and
winter.
tap water.
The snow
I
was
could hear him
high
laughing with
and
his
hope
wife
was
while I sat
fading
there alone.
fast.
I
But
gave him
you
my
see, the
whole
thing
life
about
and he
growing
gave me a
old by the
locked door.
fire is you
When he
realize
finally opened
warmth
it, I
isn't
said
just
nothing.
about the heat,
But
it's
in my
about the
mind, I
stories we
had already
share.
decided what I was going to do next. My name is Frank Miller. I raised my son, Ethan, alone after his mother passed away. Sarah died when he was only 8 years old. On that rainy afternoon in October, as I held her hand for the last time, I made a promise I intended to keep until my dying breath. I would never let our boy feel alone or unprotected. I would give him the life she would have wanted for him. And for 28 years, I did exactly that. I worked every job I could find. Mornings as a janitor at the local high school, scrubbing floors and cleaning bathrooms before most people had their first cup of coffee. Evenings at a warehouse loading and unloading trucks until my back felt like it would snap in two. Weekends fixing anything people would pay me for. Leaky faucets, broken doors, patchy roofs. I went without new clothes for years so Ethan could have proper school uniforms, new shoes when he outgrew the old ones, and the best books. I skipped meals so he could eat 3 times a day. Every birthday I made sure he had a cake, even if I had to bake it from whatever I could find in our small kitchen. "Dad, why don't you ever buy anything for yourself?" Ethan asked me once when he was about 12. He had noticed I was wearing the same faded blue shirt I'd worn for years. "Because I have everything I need," I told him, ruffling his hair. "And seeing you happy is worth more than any new shirt." He smiled then, the kind of smile that made all the sacrifices worthwhile. But looking back, I wonder if that's when the seeds were planted. The idea that my sacrifices were normal, expected, invisible. Mrs. Jenkins from next door tried to set me up with her sister once. She was a nice woman, pretty, with a good job at the local bank. Frankly, Mrs. Jenkins said, "It's been years. Sarah would want you to be happy." I thanked her but declined. "I need to focus on Ethan," I explained. "Dating would just complicate things." The truth was, I couldn't imagine loving anyone the way I'd loved Sarah. And more importantly, I didn't want Ethan to feel like he was competing for my attention or that I was trying to replace his mother. So I poured all my love and energy into raising him instead. When he wanted to play sports, I paid for his gear, secondhand when possible, but always in good condition. I never let him feel like we couldn't afford things, even when my wallet was nearly empty. When he needed help with homework, I stayed up late to help him even after 12-hour shifts that left my body aching and my eyes struggling to stay open. I thought love and sacrifice would be enough to raise him into a man who respected me. I thought gratitude would naturally follow. I remember a particularly difficult winter when Ethan was 14. The heating in our small apartment broke down and the landlord was dragging his feet about fixing it. I couldn't afford to stay in a motel, so I gave Ethan extra blankets and slept with just a thin sheet myself. I caught pneumonia and ended up in the hospital for 3 days. The hospital bills wiped out what little savings I had. When I got home, I found a stack of letters from Ethan's school hidden under his mattress. They were thank you notes for donations I supposedly made to the school, along with notices about reduced tuition fees. I confronted him about it. "They offered to help," he admitted, eyes downcast. "I didn't want you to know because you always say we don't need charity." I was stunned. My son had gone behind my back because he knew how hard I was working and wanted to ease my burden. It was the first time I realized he understood, truly understood, the sacrifices I was making. It broke my heart and filled it with pride at the same time. "Ethan," I said, my voice steady despite the emotion threatening to spill over, "there's nothing wrong with accepting help when it's offered with respect. But I need you to be honest with me. We're a team, you and me." He nodded, and I thought we had reached an understanding that would carry us through life. I was wrong. As Ethan grew older, he excelled in school. His teachers praised his intelligence and work ethic. He earned a partial scholarship to college, and I was determined to cover the rest so he wouldn't start his adult life with debt. I didn't want him to struggle the way I had. I worked overtime, sometimes taking double shifts to cover every tuition bill on time. I sold our car and took the bus to save money. I moved us to a smaller apartment, closer to my jobs to save on transportation costs. Every penny I could squeeze out went toward his education. I didn't tell him that while he was studying in warm classrooms, I was cleaning offices at night with hands numb from cold water in the mop bucket. I didn't tell him about the pain in my back that kept me awake at night or how I had to wrap my knees in bandages just to get through a shift. I thought it was worth it because I was investing in his future. "You don't need to work so hard, Dad," he would say during his visits home. "I could take out some student loans." "Absolutely not," I would reply. "When you graduate, you'll be free to focus on your career, not on paying back debt." What I never said aloud, what I held close to my heart, was this: I don't need you to pay me back. I just need you to understand that what I'm doing isn't out of obligation. It's out of love. I imagined him graduating, getting a good job, and maybe one day taking care of me the way I had taken care of him. Not because he owed me, but because we were family. Because that's what family does. During his final year of college, Ethan met Rebecca. She came from a comfortable family, had never known true hardship, and looked at the world with the confidence of someone who had always been given what they wanted. I was happy for Ethan. He deserved someone like her, someone untouched by the struggles that had shaped our lives. When they announced their engagement after graduation, I knew exactly what I wanted to give them. Over the years, I had managed to save a small amount from my retirement fund. Not much, but enough for a down payment on a modest house in a good neighborhood. With a loan from the bank, I could give them something I had never been able to give Ethan growing up: stability. "Mr. Miller, are you certain about this?" Peter Collins, my lawyer and perhaps the closest thing I had to a friend after all these years, asked when I explained my plan. "This is your retirement we're talking about." "I'm certain," I replied. "Ethan and Rebecca need a good start in life. A house of their own will give them that." "Then at least let me structure this properly," Peter insisted. "If you're going to do this, let's make sure it's done right." We spent hours in his office going over the details. In the end, we decided that I would maintain legal ownership of the house, but give Ethan and Rebecca full use of it as a wedding gift. The deed would remain in my name for financial security reasons. "You should explain this arrangement to Ethan," Peter advised. "Make sure he understands that this is still legally your property, even if you're giving them the use of it." I considered Peter's advice, but something held me back. Maybe it was pride. I didn't want Ethan to think I didn't trust him completely. Maybe it was the desire to give a gift without complications or conditions. Or maybe deep down I feared that telling him would somehow diminish the gesture. "He doesn't need to know the details," I said finally. "It's their house in every way that matters." Peter frowned but didn't push the issue. "It's your decision, Frank, but these things have a way of coming up later." I should have listened to him, but at the time all I could think about was the look on Ethan's face when I handed him the keys on his wedding day. The ceremony was small but beautiful. Rebecca was radiant in her white dress, and Ethan looked happier than I'd ever seen him. After the reception, as guests were leaving, I pulled them aside and handed them an envelope. "What's this, Dad?" Ethan asked, opening it to find a set of keys and an address. "It's your wedding gift." I explained, my voice thick with emotion. "A house, your house." Rebecca gasped. Ethan stared at me, speechless. "I can't accept this," he finally said. "Dad, this is too much." "It's already done," I assured him. "I want you both to have a good start. Something solid to build your life on." Ethan hugged me, then tighter than he had since he was a small boy. Rebecca joined in, thanking me profusely. In that moment, everything felt right. Every sacrifice, every long night, every aching muscle. It had all been worth it to reach this perfect moment. "This is yours now," I told them, "so you'll always have a place to live." I didn't mention that the deed was still in my name. In my mind, there was no reason to doubt him. He was my son. Why would I ever need to protect myself from my own child? The first few months were a period of adjustment. I moved into one of the smaller bedrooms in the house, giving them the master suite. I stayed out of their way as much as possible, cooking my own meals, cleaning my own room, doing my own laundry. I thought I was being respectful. I didn't want to interfere in their marriage or make Rebecca feel like she wasn't the woman of the house. But little by little, things began to change. The gratitude I thought they felt for me started to fade. I was no longer the man who had sacrificed everything for his son. I became the old man in the back room, the unwelcome guest in what they increasingly thought of as their home. It started with small comments about the way I lived. "Dad, do you have to watch TV so late? The sound carries through the whole house." Then it was about food. Frank, we'd appreciate it if you'd stop buying so much milk. It takes up too much space in the fridge, and most of it goes bad before you finish it. At first, I told myself it was just them being stressed from work, maybe even worried about bills. The house wasn't expensive, but maintaining it cost more than they had expected. I offered to help with utilities, but Ethan declined, saying they could handle it. I respected his pride, even as I noticed the way he looked at me when he thought I wasn't watching, as if calculating the cost of my presence. I had given him everything I had. I didn't keep savings for myself because I thought he would always make sure I had what I needed. I believed our bond was built on trust, respect, and love. But standing in that house, the one I bought, the one I gave him, I started to feel like a stranger. I could sense it in the way he avoided sitting with me, the way Rebecca barely spoke to me, the way they whispered behind closed doors and stopped when I walked in. Looking back, I think the problem started when I made life too easy for him. He never had to fight for anything the way I did. He never knew what it was like to be cold hungry and still have to go to work. He never learned how heavy sacrifice feels on a man's back. Because of that, he didn't value what he was given. And maybe, just maybe, he didn't value me anymore either. I still remember the day I first noticed his patience had run out. I had been fixing the garden fence in the back. It was something I always did to keep the place nice, to contribute in some small way. Ethan came outside, saw me working, and instead of saying thank you, he asked, "Why are you making noise right now? I'm trying to relax." I laughed it off, thinking maybe he was having a bad day. But inside it hurt. It hurt because I realized he didn't see me as helping. He saw me as a bother. Even then, I didn't let my mind go to the dark place. I still thought, he's my son. He'll come around. I thought about all the years I'd been there for him. How could he forget the man who carried him on his shoulders when he was too tired to walk? The man who worked himself sick so he could live without debt? The man who gave him a house without asking for a penny in return? I told myself blood was stronger than irritation, that deep down he still respected me. One afternoon, I was in the kitchen making myself a sandwich when I overheard Rebecca talking to her mother on the phone in the living room. She didn't know I was there. "It's just so frustrating, Mom," she was saying, her voice low but clear. "We never have any privacy. He's always there watching TV or puttering around the house. I know he's Ethan's father, but I didn't sign up to live with an old man." I froze, the knife hovering over the bread. "Ethan says we can't ask him to leave because he gave us the house," she continued. "But honestly, what kind of gift comes with strings attached like that? If he really wanted to give us the house, he should have just given it to us completely and found his own place." I set the knife down quietly and left the kitchen without making a sound. In my room, I started a small journal, recording my thoughts and feelings. It wasn't that I wanted to document the hurt. I needed to make sense of what was happening. How had we gone from the closeness we once shared to this cold distance? Today, I wrote, "I realized I might have overstayed my welcome. The house I bought with my life savings has become a prison, not for them, but for me." My arthritis had been getting worse. Years of physical labor had taken their toll on my joints, especially my knees and back. The doctor prescribed medication, but it was expensive, and I didn't want to ask Ethan for help. I had always been the provider, not the one in need. The cold made the pain worse, so I relied on hot showers to ease the stiffness in my joints. I never mentioned this to Ethan or Rebecca. It seemed like a weakness, an admission that I was getting old, becoming a burden. Ethan began implementing rules about utilities. The thermostat was set lower than I found comfortable. Lights were to be turned off immediately when leaving a room. And the hot water, that became a particular point of contention. "We're not made of money, Dad," Ethan would say if I took what he deemed too long in the shower. "Do you know how much it costs to heat water these days?" I tried to comply with their rules. I wore extra sweaters instead of turning up the heat. I used a small reading light instead of the overhead lamp. I tried to time my showers, though the relief they provided from pain made it difficult to rush. One evening, my neighbor Sam noticed me struggling to walk to the mailbox. He had known me for years. We had moved into the neighborhood around the same time. "Frank, you don't look so good," he said, concern evident in his voice. "Everything all right at home?" "Just getting old," I replied with a forced smile. Sam wasn't fooled. "That's not what I mean, and you know it. I've seen the way your boy talks to you these days." "Not right, Frank. Not right at all." I shrugged, uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. He's just stressed with work and the house. It'll pass. Sam looked at me for a long moment. Pride's a dangerous thing, Frank. Sometimes you need to speak up before things go too far. I should have listened to Sam. Maybe if I had been honest with Ethan about my health issues, about how much I needed those hot showers, things would have turned out differently. But I kept silent, not wanting to be a burden, not wanting to seem weak in front of the son I had always protected. The incident happened on a particularly cold evening in late November. I had spent hours trying to fix a leaking pipe under the kitchen sink. My hands were numb, my back was screaming in pain, and all I wanted was a hot shower to ease the ache in my joints. I turned the water as hot as it would go and stood under the stream, feeling the warmth slowly penetrate my stiff muscles. I lost track of time. The relief was so great. It might have been 15 minutes or more before I heard the pounding on the door. At first, it was a light knock, but it quickly turned into loud, angry thuds. "How long are you going to be in there?" Ethan's voice came through the door, sharp and accusing. "You're wasting all the hot water." I tried to answer calmly, telling him I was almost done. But before I could even finish my sentence, he shouted back, his words dripping with contempt. "You think I'm made of money? You have no respect for other people in this house." There was no reasoning with him. His voice was so loud it drowned out the sound of the running water. And then without warning, I heard the distinct click of the lock from the outside. My heart sank. He had locked me in. At first I thought it was a joke, a cruel one maybe, but a joke nonetheless. I called his name, told him to unlock the door. No answer. I banged on the door, thinking maybe he'd realize how absurd this was, but all I heard was the sound of him walking away. Minutes passed, then hours. I sat on the edge of the bathtub, wrapped in a towel that quickly grew cold. The steam faded, replaced by the chill of the tiles. My stomach growled, my throat dry. I had nothing to eat, nothing to drink, except the trickle of water from the sink. From the other side of the door, I could hear him and Rebecca laughing. Their voices muffled but unmistakable. They were watching TV, eating dinner, living their lives, while I sat trapped in the smallest room of the house I owned. Every sound from outside was a reminder that they had chosen to put me here and that they weren't in any hurry to let me out. The first night I barely slept. The bathroom floor was cold and unyielding. Every time I drifted off, the ache in my back or the sound of pipes groaning would jolt me awake. By morning, my head pounded from dehydration and my hands trembled from hunger. I thought maybe he'd let me out once he cooled down. But when the second day began, I realized this wasn't about cooling down. This was about control. This was about humiliation. He would pass by the door and I'd hear the faint jingle of keys, but he wouldn't stop. Sometimes he'd linger just long enough for me to know he was there, then walk away. It was like he wanted me to understand my place, like he wanted to break me without laying a hand on me. By the end of the second day, something inside me shifted. The anger was there, yes, but beneath it was something deeper, a final quiet breaking point. I knew in that moment that whatever bond we had as father and son was gone. He had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. On the morning of the third day, the door unlocked just like that. No apology, no explanation. Ethan didn't even look at me. He just muttered, "Don't waste water again," and walked away. I stepped out, my legs stiff and my head light. I didn't respond. I didn't yell. I didn't tell him how cruel he had been. I just walked to my room, closed the door, and sat on the edge of my bed. I didn't know exactly what I would do yet. But I knew one thing: this house, the roof over his head, the walls he thought belonged to him, they were mine. And before long, they wouldn't be his anymore. For 2 days, I had been a prisoner in a house I owned, treated worse than a stranger by the son I had raised with love and sacrifice. As I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the wall, I realized that I had been imprisoned long before Ethan locked that bathroom door. I had been living in a cage built from my own expectations, my own hopes for gratitude and respect that would never come. I opened the small drawer in my nightstand and took out the journal and had started keeping. I began to write not in anger, but with a strange, calm clarity that surprised even me. "There comes a time," I wrote, "when a man must acknowledge that what he believed was love might have been something else entirely. Not on my part. I loved my son with every fiber of my being. But love that isn't returned becomes a weight that drowns you slowly. Today, I choose to swim." The first thing I needed was to confirm what I already knew. The deed to the house was still in my name. I had kept it in a small safe hidden in my closet, along with other important documents. My will, Sarah's death certificate, the life insurance policy that had helped us survive after she passed. The safe had remained untouched for years. I reached up to the top shelf of my closet where I kept a box of old tools and fished out the key from a small envelope taped to the bottom of the box. I opened the safe and there it was. The deed with my name printed clearly at the top, date stamped and notarized. Legal proof that this house, the one Ethan and Rebecca treated as exclusively theirs, still belonged to me. I carefully returned the deed to the safe, locked it, and replaced the key in its hiding place. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I called Peter Collins, my lawyer. "Frank Miller," I said when his secretary put me through, "I need to discuss the house." "Frank," Peter's voice was warm, genuinely pleased to hear from me. "It's been a while. Is everything all right?" "No," I said simply, "everything is not all right. But it will be. Can I come see you tomorrow?" He must have heard something in my voice because he didn't ask questions. He just said, "Of course, first thing in the morning, 9 o'clock. That night I made dinner for myself as usual, a simple sandwich and soup. I ate alone in my room, listening to the sounds of Ethan and Rebecca moving around the house, talking, laughing. Once I heard my name mentioned, followed by hushed whispers, and then Rebecca's distinct giggle. I slept fitfully, my body still aching from 2 nights on the bathroom floor, my mind racing with thoughts of what would come next. But beneath the physical discomfort and mental turmoil, there was a strange sense of peace. I had made my decision. The uncertainty was gone. Now there was only the plan. The next morning I left the house early before Ethan and Rebecca were awake. I took the bus downtown to Peter's office, clutching a folder containing the deed and my other important papers. Peter's office was in an old building with high ceilings and wooden floors that creaked under your feet. His secretary, Mrs. Dawson, greeted me with a smile and a cup of coffee. She had been working for Peter since before I met him, and she had a kind face that reminded me a little of Sarah. "He's expecting you, Mr. Miller," she said, leading me to his office. "Go right in." Peter stood up when I entered, coming around his desk to shake my hand. He was a few years younger than me, with graying hair at his temples and glasses that made him look scholarly and trustworthy. "Frank," he said, gesturing for me to sit, "you look tired. What's going on?" I sat down heavily in the chair opposite his desk. For a moment, I didn't know where to begin. How do you tell someone that your own child has turned against you, that the years of love and sacrifice have amounted to nothing but contempt and cruelty? "I need to sell the house," I said finally, "the one I gave Ethan and Rebecca." Peter's eyebrows rose. "I see. And how do they feel about this?" "They don't know yet," I replied, "and I'd like to keep it that way until everything is finalized." Peter leaned back in his chair, studying me. "Frank, what happened? The last time we spoke about this house, you were excited to give it to them as a wedding gift." I took a deep breath and told him everything. The gradual change in Ethan's attitude, the growing contempt, the rules about utilities, and finally the 2 days locked in the bathroom. Peter listened without interrupting, his expression growing more concerned with each detail. When I finished, he removed his glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose. "I'm so sorry, Frank. That's awful. No one should be treated that way, especially not by their own child." He put his glasses back on and leaned forward. "Legally, you're on solid ground here. The deed is in your name. You can sell the property if you wish. But before we go down that road, have you considered other options? Have you tried talking to Ethan about how his behavior is affecting you?" I shook my head. There's nothing left to say. "He locked me in a bathroom for 2 days, Peter. 2 days, because I used too much hot water. What kind of conversation can follow that?" The morning after my meeting with Peter, I returned to the house to find Ethan and Rebecca in the kitchen. They barely looked up when I entered, continuing their conversation as if I wasn't there. I made myself a cup of coffee and stood by the counter, invisible in my own house. "I was thinking we could redo the guest bathroom next month," Rebecca was saying, scrolling through her phone. "The tiles are so outdated." "Sounds good," Ethan replied, sipping his coffee. "We could probably do most of the work ourselves to save money." I almost laughed at the irony. The guest bathroom, the one I had been locked in for 2 days, was now a renovation project. They were planning to beautify my prison cell. "Morning," I said, testing the waters. "Morning, Dad." Ethan replied, his tone neutral, as if the past 2 days had never happened. Rebecca merely nodded, not looking up from her phone. I took my coffee and retreated to my room, the small space at the back of the house that had become my sanctuary. I closed the door and sat in the old armchair by the window, looking out at the garden I had planted when we first moved in. The roses needed pruning. Peter had advised me to think carefully before making any permanent decisions. Selling the house is a big step, Frank, he had said. Once it's done, there's no going back. Your relationship with Ethan might never recover. What relationship, I had asked. The one where he locks me in a bathroom for 2 days? But now, in the quiet of my room, watching a robin hop along the fence I had built, I wondered if there was anything left to salvage. Ethan was still my son. For 28 years, I had loved him more than anything in the world. Could I really walk away from that? I decided to give it one more chance. Not for Ethan's sake, but for my own peace of mind. I needed to know I had tried everything before taking such a drastic step. That evening, I made dinner for all three of us. A pot roast with vegetables. Ethan's favorite meal since childhood. I set the table in the dining room, something we rarely used anymore. I even found an old bottle of wine I had been saving for a special occasion. When Ethan and Rebecca came home, they were surprised to find the table set and the house smelling of roast beef and herbs. "What's all this?" Ethan asked, setting his briefcase down. "I thought we could have dinner together," I said, "as a family." Rebecca's eyes darted to Ethan, a silent message passing between them. "We actually had plans to meet friends for dinner," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Oh," I tried to hide my disappointment. "Another time then." "Yeah, sure, Dad," Ethan said, already heading upstairs to change. "Sorry about the short notice." They left 20 minutes later, the pot roast cooling on the stove. I sat alone at the carefully set table, the candles I had lit casting long shadows on the wall. I poured myself a glass of the wine and raised it in a silent toast to Sarah, wondering what she would think of what our son had become. The next morning, I decided to take a different approach. Instead of trying to force a connection that Ethan clearly didn't want, I would observe and document. I needed to be sure that my feelings weren't clouding my judgment, that the situation was as bad as it seemed. I started keeping detailed notes in my journal, recording every interaction, every slight, every moment that made me feel unwelcome in what had once been my home. It wasn't just cathartic, it was evidence, both for myself and for whatever might come next. 3 days after the bathroom incident, I was in the backyard tending to my small vegetable garden. It was one of the few places I felt truly at peace in the house now. Rebecca came out onto the back porch talking on her phone. She didn't see me behind the tall tomato plants. "Mom, you don't understand how awkward it is," she was saying, her voice carrying clearly in the still afternoon air. "He's always around, watching us, judging everything we do. It's like we're living with a ghost that won't move on." I froze my hands deep in the soil. I know Ethan feels responsible for him, but this isn't what I signed up for. I thought we'd have our own place, our own life. She paused, listening. "No, we can't just ask him to leave. He gave us the house. Remember, Ethan says it would be ungrateful." Another pause. "Between you and me, I'm starting to think about whether this is sustainable long term. I love Ethan, but I didn't marry his father, too." She went back inside, leaving me kneeling in the dirt, her words echoing in my mind. I was a burden, an unwanted presence, a ghost that wouldn't move on. That night, I added a new entry to my journal. "Today I learned that my presence is destroying my son's marriage. Is that what I want to drive a wedge between them? Or am I simply an excuse for problems that already existed?" The weeks that followed brought more of the same. Small comments, exchanged glances, whispered conversations that stopped when I entered a room. I began spending more time outside the house, taking long walks around the neighborhood, chatting with Sam and other neighbors, visiting the local library where I could read for hours without feeling like an intruder. One afternoon, I ran into Mrs. Dawson Peters' secretary at the grocery store. She recognized me immediately, her kind face lighting up. "Mr. Miller, how are you doing?" "I'm managing," I replied honestly, "taking things one day at a time." She nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Peter mentioned you were going through a difficult situation with your son. I hope things are improving." I shrugged. "Not really, but I'm gaining clarity." "Sometimes that's the most important thing," she said. "Knowing where you stand, even if it's not where you hope to be." As we parted ways, she touched my arm gently. "Don't be a stranger, Mr. Miller. Peter always says you're one of the good ones. That small moment of human connection, of being seen and acknowledged, meant more to me than I could express. I had been so focused on Ethan's rejection that I had forgotten there were other people in the world who valued me. When I returned home that day, I found Ethan in the living room, staring at a stack of bills with a furrowed brow. "Everything okay?" I asked, setting down my grocery bags. He looked up startled. "Just bills. The water heater needs replacing and the property taxes are due next month." I saw an opportunity. "I could help with that if you'd like. I've got some savings." It was a test of sorts. Would he accept help from me? Would he recognize that I was still trying to be there for him? "We don't need your money, Dad," he said, his voice harder than necessary. "We can handle our own finances." "It's not a handout," I clarified. "Just family helping family." "Well, maybe if you used less hot water, we wouldn't need a new heater in the first place," he snapped. There it was, the blame, the resentment, the implication that my very presence was a problem. I retreated to my room without another word, my decision crystallizing with each step. The next day I called Peter and told him I was ready to move forward with selling the house. "Are you absolutely sure, Frank?" he asked. "I'm sure," I replied. "I've given it one last chance. Nothing's changed." Peter sighed. "All right, I'll start the process, but we'll need to do this carefully to avoid any legal complications. Given the circumstances, I recommend a private sale rather than going through a real estate agent. Less visibility that way." "Whatever you think is best," I agreed. "I trust your judgment." Over the next few days, I began making small, discreet preparations. I sorted through my belongings, deciding what to keep and what to leave behind. I researched small coastal towns where I might start fresh places with mild climates that would be easier on my arthritis. I opened a new bank account that Ethan didn't know about, separate from my regular finances. All the while, life in the house continued as before. Ethan and Rebecca largely ignored me, except to complain about some perceived inconvenience I had caused. I kept to myself, speaking only when spoken to, careful not to rock the boat while my plans took shape. One evening, about a week after I had decided to sell the house, I was searching through my closet for my old passport when I made a disturbing discovery. The small wooden box where I kept Sarah's jewelry, the few precious pieces I had saved to give to Ethan's future wife or daughter, was missing. I searched frantically, thinking I must have misplaced it. It had been years since I'd opened it, but I knew exactly where it should have been. I tore apart my closet, looked under the bed, checked every drawer in my room. Nothing. With a growing sense of dread, I went to Ethan and Rebecca's bedroom. They were out for the evening at a dinner party with friends. I had never invaded their privacy before, but this was different. Those were Sarah's things, irreplaceable sentimental items that connected us to her memory. I found nothing in their bedroom, but when I checked their bathroom, I noticed Rebecca had a new necklace hanging on her jewelry stand, a delicate gold chain with a small diamond pendant. Sarah's necklace, the one I had given her on our 10th anniversary. My hands shook as I examined it. There was no doubt it was Sarah's, which meant Ethan had taken the box from my room and given the jewelry to his wife without asking me, without even mentioning it. I carefully replaced the necklace and left the yard's room, closing the door quietly behind me. Back in my own space, I sat on the edge of my bed, a strange calm settling over me. Any doubts I had about selling the house vanished in that moment. Ethan hadn't just taken my dignity and my place in his life. He had taken the last physical connections I had to his mother. That was the night I stopped seeing him as my little boy and started seeing him as the man he had become. Selfish, entitled, ungrateful. The next morning, Peter called with news. "I think I found a buyer," he said. "A young couple, first-time homeowners. They can pay cash, which simplifies things considerably. They're eager to close quickly." "How quickly?" I asked. "2 weeks, possibly less. I've drawn up the paperwork. All we need is your signature." 2 weeks. In 14 days, I could be free of this house, free of the constant reminders of my son's rejection, free to start a new life somewhere else. "Let's do it," I said. The following Saturday, while Ethan and Rebecca were at her parents' house for their monthly family dinner, I met Peter at his office to sign the papers. The sale was straightforward. The house would change hands in 12 days, with the funds deposited directly into my new account. The buyers would take possession immediately. "What about your living arrangements?" Peter asked as I signed the final document. "Where will you go?" I've rented a small apartment near the beach in Cheddar Cove, I told him. It's a quiet town about 3 hours south of here. I'll move my things out the morning of the closing. Peter nodded, his expression a mixture of concern and understanding. And Ethan, when will you tell him? I had thought long and hard about this. Part of me wanted to be there to see his face when he realized what I had done, to witness the moment he understood that his actions had consequences. But a larger part, the part that had raised him, that had loved him unconditionally for so many years, couldn't bear to see his pain even now. I won't, I said finally. I'll be gone before he knows anything has changed. The new owners can explain. Frank, Peter said gently, he's still your son. Don't you think you owe him an explanation? I owed him a father who would protect him, provide for him, and love him, I replied. And I fulfilled that obligation for 28 years. I don't owe him anything else. But as the days passed and the date of my departure drew nearer, I found myself wrestling with that decision. Was I being too harsh? Was I allowing hurt and anger to dictate actions I might later regret? I thought about writing Ethan a letter explaining my reasons, offering him a chance to reach out when the dust settled. But every time I sat down to write, the words wouldn't come. What could I possibly say that would make him understand the depth of his betrayal? How could I express the pain of realizing that the child you sacrificed everything for sees you as nothing but a burden? 5 days before the closing date, I was clearing out the last of my belongings when I found an old photo album I had forgotten about. It contained pictures from Ethan's childhood, his first day of school, baseball games, camping trips, birthday parties. In every photo, he was smiling, his eyes bright with innocence and joy. And in many of them, I was right beside him, my arm around his shoulders, my face reflecting his happiness. What had happened to that boy? Where had I gone wrong? I took the album to the kitchen table and spent hours going through it page by page, watching my son grow up all over again. Somewhere in these photos, something had changed. Somewhere between the smiling child and the cold, distant man, a fundamental shift had occurred, and I had missed it. As I closed the album, I noticed Ethan's car pulling into the driveway. He was home early. I quickly gathered the photos and returned to my room, not ready to face him, with these fresh emotions swirling inside me. Later that evening, I heard a knock on my door, the first time Ethan had knocked in months. Usually he just called my name from the hallway if he needed something. "Come in," I said, curious. Ethan entered, looking uncomfortable. "Dad, Rebecca and I have been talking, and we think it might be better for everyone if you considered moving to Sunshine Meadows." I stared at him, not understanding. "What's Sunshine Meadows?" "It's a retirement community," he said, not meeting my eyes. "They have assisted living options. It would give you more independence and you'd be around people your own age." The words hit me like a physical blow. A retirement home. My son wanted to put me in a home. I was only 58 years old, fully capable of caring for myself, and he was already trying to ship me off to die among strangers. "I see," I managed to say, my voice surprisingly steady despite the storm raging inside me. "It's not that we don't want you here." Ethan continued, his tone suggesting exactly the opposite. "It's just that Rebecca and I are thinking about starting a family soon, and space is going to be tight." Starting a family? My son was planning to have children, my grandchildren, and his solution was to remove me from the picture entirely rather than seeing me as part of that family. "I'll think about it," I lied, just wanting him to leave before I said something I couldn't take back. He nodded, looking relieved. "Great, we can go tour the place next weekend if you want. They have really nice facilities." After he left, I sat in stunned silence for a long time. Then I opened my journal and wrote a single sentence. "Today, my son suggested I move to a retirement home so he could have more space for a family he hasn't even started." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what Ethan had said about the casual way he had suggested removing me from his life, as if all the years, all the sacrifices, all the love counted for nothing. In the early hours of the morning, I made a decision. I had been planning to leave a letter for Ethan, offering a chance for reconciliation once he had learned his lesson. Now I wasn't sure there would be a letter. Some betrayals cut too deep for words to heal. The next day, I went through my daily routine as if nothing had changed. I made breakfast, read the newspaper, worked in the garden. Ethan and Rebecca were both busy with their jobs, leaving early and returning late. They barely spoke to me, which suited my purposes perfectly. The less contact we had, the easier my departure would be. In the evening, while they were out at a movie, I packed the last of my belongings. Clothes, books, personal items that couldn't be easily replaced. Everything fit into 2 suitcases and a small box. It was surprising how little I needed to take with me. Most of my life's possessions were tied up in this house in memories that no longer served me. 3 days before the closing date, I received a call from Peter. "The buyers want to close early," he said. "They're eager to move in and all the paperwork is ready. Could you be out by tomorrow?" Tomorrow. The word sent a jolt through me. Was I ready to leave so soon, to cut ties with the life I had built, with the son I had raised? Yes, I heard myself say, "Tomorrow works." I made arrangements for a small moving truck to pick up my things first thing in the morning. I booked a hotel room in Cedar Cove for a few nights while I finalized the lease on my new apartment. Everything was falling into place with a speed that felt both terrifying and exhilarating. That evening, as I sat in my room, looking out at the garden for what would be the last time, I heard Ethan and Rebecca in the kitchen discussing their plans for the guest bathroom renovation. Their voices drifted down the hallway, carefree and animated, completely unaware that by this time tomorrow, they would no longer have a house to renovate. I thought about joining them, about sitting down at the kitchen table and telling them everything, giving Ethan one last chance to be the son I had raised him to be. But what would be the point? He had made his choices. Now it was time for me to make mine. In the morning, I woke before dawn. The house was silent, Ethan and Rebecca still asleep. I moved quietly, carrying my suitcases to the front door, making one final check to ensure I hadn't forgotten anything important. In my room, I looked at the bed where I had slept for the last time, the small desk where I had written in my journal, the window that framed the garden I would never tend again. So many memories in this space, both good and bad. I had decided to leave a letter after all. Not a long explanation or a plea for understanding, but a simple statement of facts. Ethan deserved to know that his actions had consequences, that the way he had treated me had led directly to this moment. I placed the envelope on the kitchen table where he would find it when he woke up. Inside was a single page with 3 paragraphs. "Ethan, by the time you read this, I will be gone, and so will this house. I have sold it to a young couple who will be taking possession today. They are aware of the situation and have legal documentation proving their ownership. You locked me in a bathroom for 2 days because I used too much hot water. You took your mother's jewelry without asking. You suggested I move to a retirement home so you could have more space. Each of these actions revealed how little you value me, how little respect you have for the father who sacrificed everything to give you a good life. I hope someday you understand what you've lost. Not just a house, but a father who loved you more than his own life. Dad." As I placed the letter on the table, I noticed something on the refrigerator. A brochure for Sunshine Meadows, the retirement home Ethan had mentioned. The cover showed smiling elderly people playing cards in a sterile-looking common room. This was what my son had planned for me. This was my future in his eyes. I took one last look around the kitchen, where I had cooked countless meals for Ethan, where I had watched him grow from a boy to a man. Then I picked up my suitcases and walked out the front door, closing it quietly behind me. The moving truck was waiting at the curb, the driver leaning against the hood, sipping coffee from a paper cup. He nodded at me as I approached. "Mr. Miller, ready when you are." I looked back at the house. My house, though not for much longer. The house I had bought with years of hard work, the house I had given to my son as a gift, the house that had become a symbol of everything that had gone wrong between us. "I'm ready," I said, and I was surprised to realize it was true. Despite the pain, despite the sense of loss, I felt lighter than I had in years. Free. As the truck pulled away from the curb, I didn't look back. I had spent too many years looking back, trying to hold on to something that no longer existed. Now it was time to look forward, to discover who Frank Miller could be when he wasn't defined by being Ethan's father. 3 hours later, I stood on a small balcony overlooking the ocean, the salt breeze cool on my face. My hotel room was simple but comfortable, with a view of the water and the rhythmic sound of waves breaking on the shore. My phone had been silent all morning. I imagined Ethan was still asleep, unaware that his world was about to change dramatically. Or perhaps he had found my letter, already was calling my old number in a panic, trying to understand what had happened. I had changed my number the day before another thread cut in the process of freeing myself. I felt a momentary twinge of guilt. Was I being too harsh? Too final? But then I remembered the cold bathroom floor, the sound of Ethan and Rebecca laughing while I sat hungry and alone, the casual way he had suggested I move to Sunshine Meadows. No, I wasn't being too harsh. I was finally standing up for myself after years of putting his needs before my own. Peter had called earlier to confirm that the sale had been finalized. The money was in my account, a substantial sum that would support me comfortably for years to come. The new owners would be arriving at the house around noon, ready to claim their new home. I imagined the scene: Ethan and Rebecca waking up, finding my letter, their disbelief turning to panic as they realized I wasn't joking. Then the doorbell ringing, strangers on the threshold with legal documents proving that the house was now theirs. The shock, the confusion, the desperate attempts to reach me by phone. It should have made me happy, this vision of their comeuppance. But all I felt was a deep, hollow sadness. This wasn't how I had imagined my relationship with my son would end. This wasn't the legacy I had wanted to leave. I turned away from the ocean view and sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline of the morning had worn off, leaving me drained and melancholy. I had won, in a sense. I had reclaimed my power, asserted my worth, secured my financial future. But it felt like a Pyrrhic victory, one that cost more than it gained. My phone rang, startling me. It wasn't Ethan. He didn't have my new number. It was Peter. "It's done," he said when I answered. "The new owners have taken possession. I thought you'd want to know." "How did it go?" I asked, not sure I wanted to hear the details. Peter hesitated. "About as well as could be expected. Your son was upset. He threatened legal action, but I explained the situation clearly. The house was always in your name, Frank. He has no legal recourse." I closed my eyes, picturing Ethan's face contorted with anger and betrayal. And Rebecca, she was in tears. I think the reality hit her pretty hard. "They asked where you were, but I told them I wasn't at liberty to say." A heavy silence fell between us. "Did I do the right thing, Peter?" I finally asked, voicing the doubt that had been growing since I left the house. "That's not for me to say," he replied gently. "You did what you felt you had to do after being treated badly for a long time. Whether it was right or wrong, only time will tell." After we hung up, I lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. The distant sound of waves provided a rhythm to my thoughts, a constant reminder that life goes on, that tides rise and fall regardless of human dramas. I had imagined this moment for weeks, the moment when Ethan finally understood that his actions had consequences, when the comfort he had taken for granted was suddenly stripped away. I had thought it would feel like justice, like vindication. Instead, it felt like loss. One more loss in a life that had already seen too many. But there was no going back now. The house was sold, the money transferred, my old life left behind. All I could do was move forward one day at a time and hope that somewhere down the road there might be a chance for healing. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across my hotel room, I opened my journal and wrote a new entry. Today, I left the house I bought, the son I raised, and the life I knew. Tomorrow, I start again. There is freedom in that, and fear and hope. Mostly hope. The sound of waves became my constant companion in the days that followed. My small hotel room in Cedar Cove offered a panoramic view of the ocean, its endless blue expanse stretching toward the horizon. Each morning I woke to sunlight filtering through gauzy curtains and the rhythmic percussion of water meeting shore. It had been 3 days since I left the house, 3 days since Ethan and Rebecca had discovered my letter and the new owners on their doorstep. 3 days of silence from the life I had left behind. Peter called daily with updates. Ethan had tried to contest the sale, claiming I wasn't of sound mind when I signed the papers. He had even threatened to sue Peter for facilitating what he called elder abuse. But the legal facts were clear. The house had always been in my name, and I had every right to show it. "He's angry," Peter told me during our most recent call. "Angry and confused. He keeps asking where you are, but I've kept my word. Your location is confidential." "Has he tried to understand why I did it?" I asked, hoping against hope that my actions had prompted some self-reflection on Ethan's part. Peter's hesitation told me everything I needed to know. He's mostly focused on the house, Frank. On what he's lost, not why he lost it. I thanked Peter for his update and ended the call, a familiar heaviness settling in my chest. Even now, Ethan couldn't see past his own sense of entitlement to recognize the pain he had caused. The apartment I had rented was almost ready, A small one-bedroom unit in a building 3 blocks from the beach. It came partially furnished, just enough for a man starting over, with 2 suitcases and a box of memories. I would be able to move in tomorrow. That afternoon, I walked along the shoreline, watching children build sandcastles and couples stroll hand in hand. Cedar Cove was primarily a vacation destination, but it had a small, year-round community of retirees and local business owners. The pace was slower here, the atmosphere more relaxed than the suburb where I had spent the last 3 decades. I found a bench facing the water and sat down, letting the sun warm my face. My arthritis had improved significantly since arriving here. Whether it was the warmer climate, the relief from stress, or some combination of both, I wasn't sure. But for the first time in years, I woke it without the familiar ache in my joints. As I watched the waves, I thought about the letter I had left for Ethan. Had it been too harsh? Not harsh enough. I had struggled with what to say, how to convey the depth of my hurt without sounding vindictive. In the end, I had opted for simplicity, a straightforward explanation of what I had done and why. My phone buzzed in my pocket, interrupting my thoughts. I expected it to be Peter with another update, but the number on the screen was unfamiliar. "Hello," I answered cautiously. "Is this Frank Miller?" A woman's voice, professional but warm. "Yes, it is." "Mr. Miller, my name is Laura Chen. I'm a reporter with the Cedar Cove Gazette. I understand you've recently moved to our town and have purchased property here." I frowned, wondering how she had gotten my number and how she knew about my move. "I'm not sure how that's newsworthy." "It might not be," she admitted, "except that your son has been quite vocal about the circumstances of your departure. He's given interviews to several news outlets in your previous hometown, claiming you're suffering from dementia and were manipulated into selling your house." My blood ran cold. Ethan was telling people I had dementia, that I had been manipulated. The irony would have been laughable if it wasn't so infuriating. "Mr. Miller, are you still there?" Ms. Chen prompted. "Yes," I said, finding my voice. "And I can assure you I do not have dementia. I'm perfectly sound of mind, and my decision to sell my house was made after careful deliberation." "Would you be willing to tell your side of the story?" she asked. "It seems like there might be more to this situation than what your son is sharing." I hesitated. The last thing I wanted was to air my family's dirty laundry in public. But if Ethan was spreading lies about my mental state, perhaps the truth needed to be told. "I appreciate your interest, Ms. Chen, but this is a private family matter. I'd prefer not to discuss it in the newspaper." "I understand," she said, sounding disappointed but respectful. "If you change your mind, please don't hesitate to call me. Sometimes telling your story can be therapeutic." After we hung up, I sat on the bench for a long time, watching the tide come in. Ethan was trying to paint me as a confused old man who didn't know what he was doing. It was a desperate attempt to salvage his reputation and possibly to build a case for invalidating the sale. That evening, I called Peter and told him about the reporter's call. "I was afraid something like this might happen," he sighed. "Ethan came to my office yesterday demanding to know where you were. When I refused to tell him, he said he'd find other ways to resolve the situation. I guess this is what he meant." "Can he actually contest the sale based on claims that I have dementia?" I asked, worried, despite my confidence in the legal paperwork. "Not successfully," Peter assured me. "We have the medical records from your physical last month, which show no signs of cognitive impairment. Plus, the documentation for the sale is airtight, but he could make things unpleasant for a while." "He already has," I said wearily. "Frank," Peter said, his voice gentle, "have you considered talking to him directly? Not to give in, but to explain your side without the emotion of the moment?" I had considered it more times than I cared to admit. But each time I remembered the cold bathroom floor, the sound of Ethan's laughter while I sat hungry and trapped the casual way he had suggested I move to a retirement home. The pain was still too raw. "Not yet," I told Peter. "Maybe someday, but not yet." The next day I moved into my new apartment. It was smaller than my room in the old house, but it was mine in a way that space had never been. The living room had a large window overlooking a small courtyard where residents gathered to chat in the evenings. The bedroom was just big enough for a double bed and a dresser. The kitchen was compact but functional. I spent the day arranging my few belongings, making the space feel like home. I hung a couple of pictures on the walls, not family photos, which carried too many painful memories, but landscapes I had found at a local thrift store. I stocked the refrigerator with fresh food from the farmer's market. I put my books on the small shelf in the living room. By evening, the apartment had begun to feel like mine. I sat on the sofa, a comfortable second-hand piece I had bought that morning, and looked around at my new domain. It was modest, but it was peaceful. No one would lock me in the bathroom here. No one would suggest I move to a retirement home to make space for their unborn children. No one would treat me like an unwelcome guest. For the first time in years, I felt truly at home. The next few weeks fell into a pleasant routine. I woke early each morning, made coffee, and walked to the beach to watch the sunrise. The arthritis in my knees had improved so much that I could now walk several miles without pain. I would return to my apartment for breakfast, then spend my days exploring the town, reading at the local library, or chatting with neighbors. Cedar Cove had a small but active senior center where I began taking a pottery class on Tuesday afternoons. I had never been artistic, but there was something soothing about working with the clay, feeling it take shape under my hands. My first attempts were laughably bad lopsided bowls and mugs that leaked, but I found myself looking forward to the class each week. It was at the senior center that I met Margaret. She was a widow in her early 60s with silver-streaked dark hair and laugh lines around her eyes. She taught the pottery class and owned a small gallery in town where she sold her work. "You're new here," she observed during my third week in her class. "Cedar Cove or just the center?" "Both," I replied. "I moved here about a month ago." "From where?" "Up north," I said vaguely. I had become cautious about sharing too many details of my previous life. Margaret seemed to sense my reticence and didn't press. Instead, she showed me how to center the clay on the wheel, her hands guiding mine with gentle pressure. "The secret," she said, "is to find the center and work from there. If your foundation isn't steady, nothing else will be." It felt like advice for more than just pottery. After class, she invited me to join her and some other students for coffee at the cafe next door. I hesitated, my instinct for solitude warring with the unexpected desire for company. "Come on," she urged with a smile. "No one should drink coffee alone if they don't have to." I went and found myself enjoying the easy conversation, the laughter, the simple pleasure of being part of a group. These people knew nothing about my past, about Ethan, about the house. They accepted me as I was, just Frank, the new guy with the terrible pottery skills. As weeks turned into months, my new life took on a comfortable shape. I volunteered at the local library 3 mornings a week, shelving books and helping with children's story hour. I joined a walking group that met at the beach on Saturdays. I became a regular at Margaret's gallery, where I would sit and read while she worked on new pieces. We never discussed my past, and she never pushed for details. But one evening, as we walked back from dinner at a local seafood restaurant, she said quietly, "You know, Frank, whatever you're running from, and we're all running from something, it doesn't define you. Not unless you let it." I stopped walking, startled by her insight. "Is it that obvious?" She shrugged. "Only to someone who's done some running herself. The way you change the subject when certain topics come up. The way you check your phone but never make calls. The way you sometimes get this faraway look like you're seeing something the rest of us can't." I didn't know how to respond, so I said nothing. "You don't have to tell me," Margaret continued. "Just know that if you ever want to talk, I'm a pretty good listener." That night, I lay awake thinking about Margaret's words. Was I running? I had thought of my move as an act of liberation, a reclaiming of my dignity and independence. But perhaps there was an element of escape as well. Running from the pain of Ethan's betrayal, from the memory of those 2 days locked in the bathroom, from the knowledge that the child I had raised with so much love could treat me with such callous disregard. 6 months after leaving the house, I received a letter forwarded by Peter. The envelope had no return address, but I recognized Rebecca's handwriting immediately. For a long moment, I just held the letter, uncertain whether I wanted to read it. What could she possibly say that would make any difference? Now, finally, curiosity won out, and I carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in Rebecca's neat, precise script. "Frank, I don't know if this will reach you, but I had to try. Ethan doesn't know I'm writing to you. Things have been difficult since you left. We found an apartment, but it's small and expensive. Ethan lost his job last month. Budget cuts, they said, but I think the stress of everything affected his work. I'm not writing to ask for money or help. I just thought you should know that Ethan isn't the same person he was before. He's quieter, more thoughtful. He asks about you, sometimes wondering if you're okay where you might be. The night before we had to leave the house, he went into your room and sat there for hours. I found him holding an old picture of the two of you. I think it was from a camping trip when he was young. He was crying, Frank. I've never seen him cry like that before. I'm not excusing what he did to you. It was wrong, and I was wrong to stand by and let it happen. I should have said something when he locked you in the bathroom. I should have been a better person. I don't know if there's any way back from what happened. Maybe too many lines were crossed, too many words said that can't be taken back. But I wanted you to know that your son misses his father even if he can't admit it yet. If you ever want to reach out, we're still at the same phone number. Rebecca, I read the letter 3 times, emotions swirling through me like leaves caught in a whirlwind. Anger, sadness, a grudging sympathy, and beneath it all, a persistent ache for what might have been. Ethan had lost his job. They were living in a small, expensive apartment. He had cried while holding an old photograph of us. It should have brought me satisfaction. Wasn't this exactly what I had wanted? For him to understand the consequences of his actions, to feel some measure of the pain he had caused me, but all I felt was hollow. I carefully folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. I wasn't ready to respond, wasn't sure I would ever be ready. But I didn't throw it away either. Instead, I placed it in the small box where I kept Sarah's wedding ring and the few photos I had brought with me from the old house. That evening, I told Margaret about the letter over dinner at her house. I had begun spending more time with her in recent weeks, drawn to her warmth, her wisdom, and her unfailing ability to make me laugh. We weren't romantic, both of us carried too much history for that, but we had developed a friendship that felt more genuine than any I had known in years. "So what are you going to do?" she asked after I had shared the contents of the letter. "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me thinks he deserves what he got. Another part misses your son," she finished for me. I nodded, unable to speak around the sudden lump in my throat. "Frank," Margaret said gently, "forgiveness isn't about absolving someone of responsibility for what they did. It's about freeing yourself from the burden of carrying that hurt forever." "I'm not sure I'm ready to forgive," I said honestly. "That's okay too," she assured me. "There's no timeline for healing. Just don't close the door on the possibility." A week later, I received a call from Peter. Ethan had come to his office again, this time without threats or accusations. He had simply asked for a way to contact me, a chance to talk. "I told him I couldn't give out your information without your permission," Peter said. "But he seemed different, Frank, more humble. He said he just wanted to apologize." "What do you think?" I asked, trusting my old friend's judgment. Peter was quiet for a moment. "I think he's sincere. Whether that's enough, only you can decide." I thanked him for the information and promised to think about it. And I did think about it for days afterward. I thought about it during my morning walks on the beach, during pottery class, during quiet evenings in my apartment. I thought about the son who had once looked at me with such trust and love. I thought about the man who had locked me in a bathroom for 2 days. I thought about the broken figure Rebecca had described crying over an old photograph. Could people change? Could wounds this deep ever truly heal? I wasn't sure. But I was beginning to realize that I needed to find out, not for Ethan's sake, but for my own. 1 year to the day after I had left the house, I finally made my decision. I called Peter and gave him permission to share my phone number with Ethan. "Are you sure?" Peter asked, concern evident in his voice. "I'm sure," I replied. "It's time." The call came 3 days later. I was sitting on my small balcony watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink when my phone rang. Unknown number. I took a deep breath and answered. "Hello." Silence on the other end, then a hesitant voice I would have recognized anywhere. "Dad, is that you? It's me, Ethan." Another pause, longer this time. I could hear his breathing, slightly uneven, as if he was struggling to maintain control. I don't know where to start," he finally said. "The beginning is usually good," I suggested, keeping my tone neutral. "Dad, I'm sorry." The words came out in a rush. "I'm so sorry for what I did to you, for how I treated you. There's no excuse, I know that, but I need you to know that I regret it every day." I said nothing, waiting for him to continue. "After you left, after we lost the house, everything fell apart. I lost my job, Rebecca and I separated for a while. It was like the universe was punishing me for what I did to you. And the worst part was, I deserved it. I deserved all of it." "Ethan," I began, but he cut me off. "Please, Dad, let me finish. I've rehearsed this so many times in my head, and if I don't say it all now, I might never get it out. I fell silent listening as my son poured out his heart. He talked about the shock of finding my letter, the disbelief when the new owners arrived at the door. He talked about the anger that had consumed him. At first, the desperate attempts to fight the sale, the public accusations of dementia. I was so blind, he said, his voice breaking, so convinced that I was the victim. It took months for me to see the truth, that I had driven you away, that I had treated you like a stranger in your own house, that I had become someone I never thought I could be. As he spoke, I felt something shift inside me, a loosening of the hard knot of anger and hurt that had lived in my chest for the past year. The day we had to leave the house, I went into your room, Ethan continued. I found that old photo album, the one with pictures from when I was a kid. Remember that camping trip to Lake Tahoe? When I fell in the lake and you jumped in to save me, even though the water was freezing. I remember, I said softly. It had been one of our best trips, just the two of us against the wilderness. You were always there for me, Ethan said. Ways, and how did I repay you? By locking you in a bathroom because you used too much hot water, by suggesting you move to a retirement home at 58, by treating you like a burden instead of the father who gave me everything. I heard a muffled sob, then the sound of Ethan clearing his throat. I don't expect you to forgive me, Dad. What I did, it's unforgivable. But I needed you to know that I understand now. I understand what I lost, and it wasn't just a house. We talked for almost 2 hours that night, not about reconciliation or forgiveness. Those would come later, if they came at all, but about the past year, about the changes in our lives. Ethan told me about his new job at a smaller company, about the apartment he and Rebecca had moved into after patching things up, about the therapy he had been attending, to understand why he had treated me the way he had. I think part of it was that you made everything look so easy, he admitted. You worked so hard, made so many sacrifices, but you never complained. You never made me feel like a burden. So when I became an adult, I had no model for how to handle stress, how to deal with frustration. I took everything out on you because you were the safe one, the one who would always love me no matter what. It was a painful insight, but an honest one. Perhaps in trying to protect Ethan from the harsh realities of life, I had unwittingly failed to prepare him for them. At the end of the call, Ethan asked the question I had been dreading. Can I see you, Dad, face to face? I hesitated. Was I ready for that, to see my son again, to confront the physical reality of him after a year of separation? Not yet, I said finally, but maybe soon. Let's keep talking for now. He accepted my decision with a grace that surprised me. The old Ethan would have pushed, would have tried to get his way immediately. This Ethan, this new, more reflective version of my son, simply said, I understand, whenever you're ready. After we hung up, I sat on my balcony for a long time, watching as stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky. The conversation with Ethan had left me emotionally drained, but strangely peaceful. For the first time in years, I felt like we had truly heard each other. The next day, I told Margaret about the call over coffee at her gallery. She listened without interrupting, her eyes warm with understanding. So what happens now? She asked when I had finished. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to see him, to try and rebuild something from the ashes of what we had. Another part is still scared that nothing has really changed, that if I let him back into my life, the same patterns will emerge. Margaret nodded thoughtfully. Trust is like pottery, she said, gesturing to a beautiful vase on display nearby. Once it's broken, you can piece it back together, but the cracks will always show. That doesn't mean it can't be beautiful again, or even useful. It just means it will never be the same as it was before. Her words stayed with me in the weeks that followed as Ethan and I continued our phone conversations. We talked twice a week, gradually rebuilding a connection that had been severed by hurt and resentment. Sometimes the conversations were easy, filled with shared memories and cautious laughter. Other times they were difficult as we navigated the jagged terrain of our broken relationship. Ethan never asked for money, never hinted at financial struggles, though I knew from Rebecca's letter that things had been tight after they lost the house. Instead, he seemed genuinely interested in my new life, my pottery class, my volunteer work at the library, my friendship with Margaret. You sound happy, Dad, he said during one call. Happier than I've heard you sound in years. I am happy, I realized as I said it. Despite the pain of the past, despite the uncertainty of the future, I had found a measure of peace in Cedar Cove that had eluded me for decades. 3 months after our first phone call, I finally agreed to meet Ethan in person. We chose a neutral location, a small cafe in a town halfway between Cedar Cove and the city where he and Rebecca now lived. I arrived early, choosing a table near the window where I could watch for his arrival. My hands trembled slightly as I sipped my coffee, my stomach tight with a mixture of anticipation and dread. What would he look like after more than a year? What would I see in his eyes when he looked at me? Regret, resentment, hope. I spotted him the moment he pulled into the parking lot. He sat in his car for a long minute, staring at the cafe, visibly gathering his courage. Then he got out and walked toward the entrance, moving with a hesitancy I had never seen in him before. When he walked through the door, our eyes met immediately. He had lost weight, and there was gray at his temples that hadn't been there before. But it was the expression on his face that struck me most, of vulnerability and openness that the old Ethan had never shown. He approached my table, slowly stopping a few feet away. "Dad," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I stood unsure what to do next. We had never been a physically demonstrative family, even in the best of times. But something in Ethan's face, a flicker of the little boy he had once been, broke through my hesitation. I opened my arms, and my son stepped into them, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "I'm sorry," he whispered against my shoulder. "I'm so sorry." We sat and talked for hours, our coffee growing cold as we navigated the complex terrain of forgiveness and redemption. Ethan showed me pictures of the apartment he and Rebecca had moved into, a modest two-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood. He told me about his new job at a small architectural firm where he had started at the bottom, despite his experience. "It's humbling," he admitted, "but in a good way. I needed to learn humility." I told him more about my life in Cedar Cove, about the peace I had found in my small apartment by the sea, about the friendships I had formed, especially with Margaret. "She sounds special," Ethan observed. "Are you two—" John, I shook my head. "Just good friends. We've both lived enough life to know what we want and don't want." As our conversation drew to a close, Ethan broached the subject I had been dreading. "Dad, about the house." "The house is gone, Ethan," I said firmly. "Sold to a young couple who needed it more than you did. That chapter is closed." He nodded, accepting my words without argument. "I understand, but I want you to know that I don't blame you for selling it. You had every right to do what you did. I just wish, I just wish I had appreciated what I had before I lost it." It was a sentiment I understood all too well. How many times had I wished I had appreciated Sarah more before she was taken from me? How many times had I wished I had recognized the first signs of Ethan's changing attitude before it was too late? We both made mistakes. I said, surprising myself with the admission. I should have been clearer about the house, about its ownership. I should have talked to you directly when I felt things changing between us. I should have stood up for myself long before it reached the point of you locking me in a bathroom. Ethan winced at the memory, but nodded. "We have a lot to learn about how to talk to each other." "Yes," I agreed, "we do." As we prepared to leave, Ethan asked the question I had been waiting for. "Can I come visit you in Cedar Cove sometime? Maybe with Rebecca? She'd like to see you two, to apologize in person." I considered his request. Was I ready to welcome them into my new life, to let them see the home I had created for myself after leaving the one we had shared? "Yes," I said finally. "I think that would be good, but not right away. Let's take this slowly, one step at a time." Ethan nodded, relief washing over his face. "Thank you, Dad, for giving me a chance I don't deserve." As we walked to our cars, Ethan hesitated, then asked, "Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive me? Truly forgive me?" I looked at my son, this complex mixture of the boy I had raised and the man he had become, and felt the last remnants of my anger begin to dissolve. "I already have," I realized aloud. "Not because you deserve it, or because what you did wasn't wrong, but because holding on to that anger was hurting me more than it was hurting you." Tears filled Ethan's eyes. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," I told him. "Just do better. Be better, not for me, but for yourself." We embraced one last time before parting ways, the physical connection bridging some of the distance that still remained between us. It wasn't a perfect reconciliation; those exist only in fairy tales. But it was a beginning, the tentative first step toward rebuilding what had been broken. As I drove back to Cedar Cove that evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, I felt lighter than I had in years. The weight of anger and betrayal that I had carried for so long had finally begun to lift. I thought about the house, the one I had bought with years of hard work, the one I had given to my son as a gift, the one I had taken back in an act of defiance and self-preservation. It had been the center of our story for so long, the physical manifestation of all that had gone wrong between us. But houses, I realized, are just structures of wood and stone. They can be bought and sold, built and demolished. The true foundations of our lives are not made of concrete, but of the connections we form, the love we give, and receive the forgiveness we offer when it's hardest to do so. I pulled into the parking lot of my apartment building as the last light faded from the sky. Margaret was waiting on the front steps, a warm smile on her face. "How did it go?" she asked as I sat down beside her. "It was a start," I said. "A good start." She nodded in understanding the complexity behind those simple words. "Life rarely gives us neat endings, does it? Just new beginnings if we're brave enough to take them." I thought about Ethan, about the long road ahead of us, about the work still to be done. I thought about the house that was no longer mine and the home I had found here in Cedar Cove. I thought about Sarah and what she would think of the man I had become, stronger, wiser, more willing to stand up for myself, but also more capable of forgiveness. New beginnings. I agreed, taking Margaret's hand in mine. "I think I'm ready for those." As we sat together under the stars, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for too long. The last house, the physical structure that had been the battleground for so much pain, was gone. But the foundation of family damage, though it was, remained. And on that foundation, however cracked and imperfect, there was still room to build something new. Not a house this time, but a home. A home defined not by walls and deeds, but by understanding, respect, and the kind of love that survives even the deepest betrayals. A home that exists not in a physical space, but in the connections we choose to nurture and the forgiveness we find the strength to offer. It wouldn't be easy. There would be setbacks, misunderstandings, old wounds reopened, and new ones created. But for the first time in years, I believed it was possible. And that I realized as I looked up at the vast expanse of stars above us was enough for now. The months that followed my reunion with Ethan brought changes I never expected. Our relationship, once shattered beyond recognition, began to take on a new form, different from what we had before, but perhaps stronger in its own way. Ethan and Rebecca visited Cedar Cove for the first time in early spring. I showed them my small apartment, introduced them to Margaret, and took them to my favorite spots along the shoreline. There was an awkwardness at first, a careful politeness as we navigated this new territory. But by the second day, something had shifted. The tension eased, replaced by a tentative warmth. "Your place suits you, Dad," Ethan remarked as we walked along the beach. "I've never seen you look so at peace." It was true, the constant pain in my joints had diminished to an occasional twinge. My face had lost the pinched, anxious expression I hadn't even realized I'd been wearing. I slept deeply each night, lulled by the distant sound of waves. "Cedar Cove has been good for me," I agreed. "It gave me a chance to discover who I am outside of being your father." Ethan nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I never considered that before, that you might need an identity beyond just being my dad. I was so wrapped up in my own life that I couldn't see you had needs too." Well, these moments of insight from Ethan still surprised me. The therapy he'd been attending had clearly given him tools for self-reflection that I had never possessed at his age. During their visit, Rebecca pulled me aside while Ethan was helping Margaret move some pottery in her studio. "I want to apologize," she said, her eyes meeting mine directly. "What happened in that house? I was complicit. I should have spoken up when Ethan locked you in the bathroom. I should have been a better person." "We all made mistakes," I replied, finding that I truly meant it. "Do you regret selling the house?" she asked quietly. I considered her question carefully. "I regret that it came to that point. I regret not communicating better, not standing up for myself sooner. But the actual selling, no. It was necessary. For all of us, I think." Rebecca nodded. "It woke us up, made us look at ourselves in ways we'd been avoiding." She hesitated, then added, "We're expecting a baby. Due in September." The news hit me with unexpected force. A grandchild. Despite everything, despite the wounds still healing between us, life was moving forward. Congratulations, I said, meaning it. You'll be wonderful parents. We hope so, she replied. We're trying to learn from past mistakes to be better than we were. When they left 2 days later, the goodbye was different from our meeting at the cafe. Less raw emotion, more genuine connection. We had found a way to be together that acknowledged the past without being defined by it. We'll call you once a week, Ethan promised, and maybe you could come visit us next month. See the apartment. I agreed, surprised by how much I wanted to see the life they were building. Summer brought more changes. Margaret and I grew closer, our friendship deepening into something neither of us had expected at this stage of life. We never used the word love. It seemed too simplistic for the complex bond between us. But there was tenderness there and understanding and a quiet joy in each other's company. I never thought I'd find this again. Margaret confessed one evening as we sat on my balcony watching the sunset. After Robert died, I assumed that part of my life was over. I know what you mean, I replied, thinking of Sarah and the years of loneliness that had followed her death. It's different this time, though, more deliberate somehow. Margaret smiled, the fading light catching the silver in her hair. When you're young, love feels like fate. When you're older, you realize it's a choice you make every day. I visited Ethan and Rebecca's apartment in July. It was small but comfortable, decorated with care despite their limited budget. They had converted the second bedroom into a nursery, the walls freshly painted a soft green. We don't know if it's a boy or girl yet, Rebecca explained. We wanted to be surprised. I noticed a familiar photograph on their living room wall. Ethan and me at Lake Tahoe, both of us laughing after I jumped into the freezing water to save him. It was the photo he'd been holding the night before they had to leave the house. Mom took that, Ethan said, following my gaze. It's one of the few pictures we have with all three of us in a way. Her behind the camera, us in front of it. The mention of Sarah didn't bring the usual pang of loss. Instead, there was a gentle nostalgia, a recognition of how her love had shaped both our lives. That night, after Ethan and Rebecca had gone to bed, I sat in their living room looking at the life they had created. It wasn't the large house I had bought them with its spacious rooms and manicured garden. It was smaller, humbler, but it felt more like a home than that house ever had. The baby, a boy they named Michael Frank Miller, was born on September 12th. I drove up immediately when Ethan called, arriving at the hospital just hours after the birth. The sight of my son holding his son, the wonder and fear and love in his eyes brought back memories of the day Ethan was born, when I had held him with the same mixture of awe and terror. Would you like to hold him? Ethan asked, carefully transferring the tiny bundle to my arms. As I looked down at my grandson's face, so new and yet somehow familiar, I felt a surge of emotion too complex to name. Joy, certainly. Pride. A fierce protectiveness. And something else. A sense of continuity of life moving forward despite our mistakes and missteps. He has Sarah's eyes, I whispered, noticing the distinctive shape. I thought so too, Ethan replied, his voice thick. I wish she could have seen him. She can, I said simply, and Ethan nodded understanding. In the months that followed, I split my time between Cedar Cove and visits to Ethan and Rebecca's. Margaret often came with me, her presence a steady comfort as we navigated this new chapter in our lives. She had a gift with the baby, a natural ease that made Michael gurgle with delight whenever she held him. You're good with him, I observed during one visit, watching her rock Michael to sleep. I had practice, she replied with a soft smile. 2 children, 4 grandchildren. They grow up so fast, Frank. Don't miss a moment of it. I took her advice to heart, treasuring the time I spent with my grandson. I read him stories, sang off-key lullabies, and watched in amazement as he began to recognize me, his tiny face lighting up when I entered the room. One afternoon, while Michael napped and Rebecca was at work, Ethan and I sat on their small patio drinking coffee. Dad, he said hesitantly, I've been thinking about something. Rebecca and I have been saving, and we're almost ready to start looking for a house again. Something modest, but with a yard for Michael. I nodded, pleased by their careful planning. That sounds sensible. The thing is, he continued, we could use some advice. Not money, he added quickly, just guidance. You've always been good with practical matters, and I trust your judgment more than mine when it comes to these things. The simple admission that he valued my opinion, that he recognized my wisdom in areas where he felt uncertain, meant more than any apology or grand gesture could have. I'd be happy to help, I told him. Whatever you need. As winter approached, bringing cool breezes to Cedar Cove and the promise of holidays, I reflected on the journey of the past 2 years. From the man who had been locked in a bathroom by his son, to the grandfather who now divided his time between two homes, between the family he had rediscovered and the new life he had built. The house, that physical structure that had been the site of so much pain, was gone from our lives. But what it represented, the mistakes, the betrayal, the harsh lessons, remained with us, transformed now into something useful rather than destructive. One evening, as Margaret and I walked along the beach under a sky ablaze with stars, she asked, "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't sold the house, if you had stayed?" I considered her question carefully, listening to the rhythm of the waves. "I think we would have continued as we were. Me growing more resentful, Ethan more entitled. The patterns were too ingrained by then. We needed the break, as painful as it was." Margaret nodded, understanding. "Sometimes we have to lose everything to find what matters." And sometimes, I added, thinking of my son, my grandson, and the woman beside me, what we rebuild is stronger than what we lost. As we turned back toward town, the lights of Cedar Cove twinkling in the distance, I felt a profound gratitude for the path that had led me here. Not just for the good parts, the peace I had found, the connections I had made, but for the painful ones as well. The betrayal that had forced me to stand up for myself. The loss that had pushed me toward a new beginning. The hard-won wisdom that came from seeing both the worst and the best in those we love. The last house, the one I had bought, given away, and then reclaimed, was no longer mine. But in losing it, I had found something far more valuable, the knowledge that home isn't defined by walls or deeds or legal ownership. It's defined by respect, by understanding, by the willingness to forgive without forgetting the lessons learned along the way. As Margaret and I reached my apartment building, I looked up at the sky once more, at the vast expanse of stars above us. Sarah was up there somewhere, I like to think, watching over all of us. Me, Ethan, Rebecca, and little Michael. Watching as we stumbled and fell and picked ourselves up again. Watching as we learned finally how to treat each other with the dignity and care we all deserved. "Come on," Margaret said, taking my hand. "Let's go home." And so we did, walking together toward the warm light of my apartment, toward the future we were building, one careful step at a time. In the end, that's all any of us can do. Move forward, carrying the past not as a burden, but as a map, a guide to territories we need not visit again. The house is gone, but the home remains, rebuilt on stronger foundations than before. That, I've come to believe, is the true meaning of liberation.